The girl drugged her mother and then her mother fainted. She covered her mother with a shroud and pushed her to the river. Esther rose to the center of the lake, cuts the rope, and lets the rocks drag her mother to the bottom of the lake. The bottom of the lake is full of bodies. Horrifyingly, the movie is based on a true story that shocked the nation in 1998. On the border of Mexico and the United States, a mother and daughter ran in with one guest a day, but all the guests were killed since they were all drug dealers or thieves. No one knows when they died. In order to get their customers to let their guard down, they often have dinner with them and then secretly drug the wine. They wait until the guests were unconscious and then start robbing them. The mother would rummage through the guests' luggage. Esther deftly opened the car seat to look for the criminals' money, which she soon found. Finally, mother and daughter and their assistant carried the guest to the lake. Even though the guest was still breathing, they tied him up, then tied him to a boulder, and finally rowed him to the center of the lake. Esther cut the rope and remained calm, taking it all in her stride. When the guest came to his senses, the struggle was pointless. Late at night, assistants would burn guests' luggage and destroy their cars. The three of them worked together to destroy the body. However, the daughter grows tired of this life of killing, but her mother says it's good to kill bad people. Only after killing enough bad guys can she have money to live happily ever after. So the girl is convinced again. One day, a new guest arrives at the inn. When Esther sees him, she notices that he's rich, wears a suit and drives a limousine, so she welcomes him warmly. That night, she served him a drugged drink and waited at the door for it to kick in. Esther waited for the man to pass out and looked for his money, but the drug dealers suddenly appear. Esther tries to get away from the drug dealers, but they are armed and have to deal with them first. The men take the wounded drug dealer back to the hotel. Esther's mother dresses his wounds and prepares his room, but the drug dealer, Keiko, is vigilant and locks up all three men. At this point, the guest is still in the room, but soon comes to his senses. Worried that her guest might wake up, Esther sneaks into his room to get rid of him, but the drugged man had already woken up and was vomiting. Esther covered her guest's mouth with a towel, only to be pushed to the ground. The guest quickly grabbed Esther's neck. Esther struggled desperately. Just then, a drug dealer rushed in, knocked out the guest, and saved Esther. Keiko takes Esther out of the room, then comes back to check on his guest, who he finds a large pool of blood on the back of his head and thinks he's dead. The two men had to rush to get rid of the body. They dragged the man into the woods to bury him, but he wasn't dead and was slowly regaining consciousness. To avoid trouble, Keiko had to tell Esther to go back to the hotel before pointing a gun at the man. It was the first time he had ever killed anyone. Keiko couldn't even look at the man, so he took off his clothes and covered the body. Esther saw it all from a distance and fell in love with Keiko for saving her life, but her mother doesn't think Keiko's actions were out of kindness and still wants to kill Keiko as soon as possible. At this point, Keiko says that the boss needs medication for his wounds. Esther had to take Keiko outside and soon reached the pharmacy. The boss is suspicious of strange men. Keiko puts his arm around Esther and pretends to be her boyfriend. Esther was happy and got to know Keiko better after talking to him on the road. Their relationship grew closer and they often went out to dinner together. But her mother couldn't accept that she was in love with Keiko, reprimanded her, slapped her in the ear. Esther began to avoid Keiko. However, Keiko took Esther's hand and persuaded her to leave her mother and start a new life with him. Keiko's persuasion made Esther hesitate. That day, her mother told Esther that it was time to kill Keiko, but Esther is already in love with Keiko, but she agrees when she realizes her mother's intentions. However, Esther found Keiko and wanted to run away with him, but Keiko, although Keiko persuaded Esther to go with him, did not want to be with Esther all the time. Keiko rejected Esther's love out of hand, but Esther doesn't want to give up. She wants to get out of the life she's in and keep Keiko alive, but Keiko continues to reject Esther. At that moment, their assistant is organizing the finances and the drug lords find him. The drug lord wants to know what he's hiding. When he saw a gold watch, he found his brother's name engraved on it. His brother has been missing for over a month. The drug lord hurriedly asked this assistant, but he didn't dare say anything. He knocked out his assistant and quickly returned to the inn to interrogate the owner's wife. The two soon got into a fight. She grabbed a wrench and stabbed the drug lord in the thigh. At that point, the aide woke up and rushed forward to help. In the melee, the woman grabs a cross from the wall and stabs the man in the neck. The drug lord died instantly. Esther and another drug lord rushed in. The woman shot Keiko directly in the heart and then added a few more shots. Because Esther had fallen in love with the drug lord, she was desperate. Her mother told her that bad people deserve to die. Esther let the two drug dealers sink to the bottom of the lake as usual because it was her mother who killed them. In the evening, they dined together as if nothing had happened. After the meal, Esther poured her mother a cup of coffee and watched her drink it. Her mother soon fainted. Esther went to her room and found millions of dollars in the cupboard. It was enough money for them to live in the city. That's when Esther realized that her mother was actually a psychopathic murderer. The money was just an excuse to deceive Esther. Esther skillfully slipped the body bag over her mother's body, and then the scene at the beginning of the video appeared. She disposed of the body as usual, but the mother, who had been with Esther before, became the prey. After Esther cuts the rope, Her mother's body sinks to the bottom of the lake and is buried with the people she hurt. In the end, Esther lies quietly in the boat, enjoying the warmth of the setting sun.